Well, hello. Don't know how well this is going to work, but we're giving it a try. Quite a while ago, a lovely chap called, well, hello, Shane. That was it, Shane. Whilst I was on Wildman's live stream, that I would give him a guide and others a guide on how to paint Slightcom miniatures. And due to lifing me, I'm only just getting around to it. So I'm putting this out live, and hopefully I can do a little bit of editing on the recorded version to see if I can't clean it up. But anyway, so you don't have to keep looking at my ugly mug, let's cut to where I will be working. And this is my mess. So I have a camera looking down onto my desk so you can sort of see what I'm doing. And there's one from the side in case that gives a better view. And there's an ugly shot of my mug so you can see it's not somebody else doing it, unless I'm really good at camera trickery. But that's Shane's deal. But what I've also managed to do, and you'll have to excuse the shakiness of this cam because I am trying something new to get a better view of what I'm doing. I've managed to hook up a mobile phone using a piece of software that if you want, you can get in touch and ask me what it is. But it's on the App Store, and it means you can use your mobile phone as a webcam, and that means I can give you a slightly better look at what I'm doing. Anyway, cut the chat. The first thing to deal with when painting figures of any kind, I've got some lovely old Scalextrics, or I believe they were actually moulded by somebody else before Scalextrics, and we might have to put her aside because she's got things showing. I've got some lovely 3D printed bits and pieces. Now, before you go into all the fun and games of undercoating and painting and all that, the reason I'm showing you these lovely blank figures to start with is whether they're moulded plastic like this, or 3D printed like this, or even resin printed, they will have things called mould lines. Or on printed figures you'll find there may be the odd line, and I don't know how well these will show up, but on this lovely chap here, don't know if you can just see if I point it out with the tweezers, there's a line that's going between his cap and his nose, and if I painted it with that in, wouldn't really look quite right. And also, let's see on here, one of these wonderful old moulded ones, just where I've got the tweezers there, you can see there's a hecking great mould line. That's where the two halves of the mould were stuck together, and when they pulled them apart it leaves a bit of a line. So the very first thing is I've got some lovely little needle files, or if you feel any good with a modelling knife, and let me try and adjust this camera just a little bit so I can get things in shot a bit better. What you can do is just with the flat of the blade, or if you've got a curved blade, is just start to scrape away those mould lines so everything gets a little bit more level. So when you go to paint it, paint isn't going to highlight that imperfection in the mould. And if you think this is being petty, well, obviously you don't have to do this. If you're painting dozens, hundreds, however many figures for your slot car track, you can miss this point out. But I feel if I didn't cover this at least quickly, then I would have a lot of irate painters of wargaming stuff and the such like telling me, oh, you're awful at that, you should be doing it this way. Well, this is just the way I do it. But here we go, down the sleeve a bit more, just to even out where that horrible big mould line is. Now, it doesn't take too long, especially if you've got a nice sharp scalpel blade or hobby knife or whatever it is you prefer to call it. You know what it is. It's a sharp knife, so don't cut yourself with it. Now, unless there's something that's a bit detailed that I want to cut into, all I'm doing is, you'll see, is I'm just scraping the flat edge. There's not really much that I'm actually cutting into, but it's just to get rid of the worst of that mould line. Now I'm hoping, apart from getting slightly more used to this broadcasting and recording and live channel malarkey, and for some reason I've just noticed that I haven't got chat enabled. Not that I've probably got anybody watching right now, but you know, hey ho, we'll have to start somewhere. But hopefully we'll get a little better at this, talking to myself on camera without sounding completely dull, dry and brain dead. Well, even though I am fairly brain dead, but you know, hey. But also it's a test of the software and this new weird camera setup, using an old mobile phone on some weird selfie recording harness that my wife bought, that you slot over your head to hold it, but instead of pointing it to me, I'm pointing it towards these figures, because I don't have a really expensive flash webcam or DSLR camera that'll pick up great amount of details, and I found my webcam really wasn't picking up the details that I needed to show you where these heckin' mould lines are. So I think that's good enough for him. Let's do a little bit more down that arm. I can see a little bit of a shadow, so that still means there's some kind of mould line there. Not looking for absolute perfection. Sometimes the mould lines you can make a feature of. I mean, this one down the side of his arm, we can say if it picks up some shading in the painting, oh, it's just part of the livery of his overalls. There we go. That's number one. Scraped and scratched, and the worst of the mould lines are off. So we'll see what old billboard man is like. Now, first things first, we'll take his billboard off so it makes life easier. There's one just in there I can see. Now, if you don't feel confident enough with a sharp hobby knife, or if by any chance this happens to be watched by any younger slot car fans who really either don't want to be let loose with a sharp blade, or mummy and daddy don't like you having a sharp blade, then there is another option, and I will show you that option now. These are my grotty old set of needle files. Yes, some have even got rust on where they've got damp, but I'm going to pick out one that I think is fairly suitable. And yeah, they're just little hobby files, but if you're not too happy or you don't want to use a sharp scalpel blade, then just gently file away over those mould lines so it gets rid of them. And part of the reason I am looking to do this is because the way I paint and the way I learnt to paint wargaming figures that are a fair size smaller than this, long time ago, was by using, at one stage, later on in the painting stage, after you've put the base colours down, is you'll use what was always called an ink wash, or a slightly more watered down version of whatever it is you're painting with. And because it's more watered down, it tends to sit more in the creases, and if it sits in the creases and you use a slightly darker shade of whatever it is you're painting, or some people just use a bit of a black or a brown wash to create some shadows. But I'll go into much more detail on that in a later part, if I don't get absolutely panned for how badly this is going and I need to try and set it up another way. But yes, the later part I will go into far more detail of the different stages of painting and how to get them looking, hopefully, a little more in depth and not just flat cartoon colour shading. But hopefully shouldn't be much more to do on these old, I believe they were Scalextric moulds, maybe MMRC they were previous to that, not too sure. I'm sure someone could correct me, especially if I get the chat enabled. And don't be surprised if you see an almost identical video of this turn up later on, purely for the fact that it means I'll have gone into the recorded version of this and tried to edit it slightly, maybe so I can put in some flashier effects and things, but we'll see. Now, I don't even know where I'm going to use these on my layout, because the layout's still waiting for the attic to have some more boards put down. But I did promise I'd put up a painting guide, so I try to be a man of my word. A little bit down the seam that side, not a hell of a lot. Now, if you've got bits of dust and things on your figures whilst you're doing this, don't worry too much. Oh, I really should have checked if that was in shot. But don't worry too much, because especially if you've got resin printed figures, you'll find what you should do at some point before you start painting them is give them a slight wash in some, not hot, but warmish water, maybe with a little bit of soap in, just in case there's any dust, to get it off, and then swill them off in pure water. And I must say, when I remember exactly who I bought these figures off, I shall have to name drop them, because there's very few support marks at all. Whoop, I'm going out of shot again. There's very few support marks on these figures at all. And with this one, there'll be a tiny little bit more work to do, because there's a couple of supports up into his face, and we don't want it to look like he's been sat there for so long he's got spider webs on him. And because I don't want to accidentally chisel away his nose, I shall resort to the file. Get the underside of his cap a bit better. See any other honking great marks? No. Now the only other thing that I am going to do here is, with a pair of flat edge cutters, so that edge is flat, and if I turn them you'll see the inside's angled. Not really good for cutting wire, but pretty good for plastic. But I don't really want him to have binoculars. I want this bloke to be sat in a garage next to this chap, and they're both going to be sat having a cup of tea. So binoculars are a bit excessive, so I'm just gonna, oh, there we go, off it flew. Hasn't left too much of a mark on his hand. I don't think it's taken his thumb away. Nope. And probably the other thing I will do is I just want to nip the top of that lovely, beautifully printed little jug away, and then see if I can't flatten it down so it looks more to be just like a cup of coffee. And again, as I said, don't worry about the dust, because the most smartest thing you'll be doing before you paint them is just give them a swill in some very lightly soapy water, and then swill them off all nice and clean with some pure water. And then if you can't dry them all out with either tissue paper or kitchen towel, just let them sit there for a bit and air dry. But there we go, there's the first bit, getting rid of the mould lines. And you'll be surprised how much of a difference that will make, especially to these older figures. Now even if you've got the old white metal ones, knife's not going to be as good, maybe a bit more with the needle file, but that will definitely help before we go any further. And the next step, after we've washed them off, will be to give them a bit of an undercoat. And now there are numerous different ways and methods of undercoating, but let's keep this simple. I tend to use just an ordinary white rattle can, spray can of white plastic primer. There are fancier ways, but let's keep this simple. Now once you have washed them off, before you undercoat them, some you'll see like these don't have a base on, or some have a chonking great big plastic base that you might want to cut off. Now if you do that, or you've got these that don't have a base, you don't really want to be touching the figures where you painted when you're painting them, because the oil of your skin gets on them. So remember, this is after you've given them a bit of a wash off and let them dry out. But if they've got no base, you can use numerous flash things like old corks, or what I tend to use, because I'm a cheapskate, is these are really old paint pots that my paints are dried up in, and I've put a bit of double-sided tape on the top, or sometimes I'll use a bit of carpet tape or even blue tack, and once they are stuck, blue tack's better really, but as you'll see here now, oh, this camera mount's being a pain. As you'll see, what I can do is I can paint the figure and turn him around at all angles, and when I'm painting I don't have to have my fingers on the figure, so if the paint's not perfectly dry I'm not going to smudge it, but also I'm not going to get any kind of oil or grease or whatever from my fingers on it. And even this bloke who sat down, I put him down there, stick him on. Now these I'm not so worried about, because they've got this big chunky base, so I can turn them round and flip them over, and I've just seen a piece of mould line that I haven't got rid of, so let's give that a quick scrape. But going on from here, I will give these a bit of a light wash off to get rid of the dust and any grease or oil on them, and then in daylight hours I'm going to take my rattle can and take them outside and give them a light dusting. I'd say possibly 2 light coats of a white plastic primer, just to make sure they look all lovely and gorgeous. And the reason you're putting a primer on is because if you don't, the paints that you put on top of that tend not to want to stick to the figure too much. So I am going to do what am I going to switch to? There we go. So if I put that back there, and no, I am not going to attach this back to his lordship here, because if I glued this in place now, trying to paint all this behind him is going to be a right pain. So before I do, possibly what I'll do, so I don't have to put my hands all over this, is I don't have one to hand right at the moment, but I'd probably get something like a cocktail stick, just a little dab of super glue on the end, so I don't have to keep my mucky paws all over this. But anyway, I am going to make you suffer my face. Anyway, if you have watched, this is only the first part, and yes, it's very simple, and we haven't even got to the painting bit yet, but I can't undercoat these indoors. My wife will kill me, and the cats will probably keep complaining because it stinks. But once I've given these an undercoat, hopefully in the next day or so, I'll come back and we'll start putting what's called the base coat, the main coat of just basic colours on them, before we start to try and trick them out and make them look a bit better. Anyway, why am I looking away from the screen? Because I'm trying to look at my OBS controls and figure out what's next. Anyway, thanks all for watching. Tune in for part 2. And that means hopefully this lovely screen, if once uploaded, I can put all the links up and things to videos and such like, and then I can quickly click through, and hopefully if you like what you've seen, there's a button for that. If you fancy seeing more, you can go subscribe, which would be great. And if you do subscribe and you click the bell, that'll tell you whenever I post something. Apart from that, thanks all, and have a good one. Cheers now.